You are listening to Interesting Canadian Mormons, a podcast featuring conversations with interesting Latter-day Saints from across Canada. I am your host, Samson Nordquist. Today, my guest is Michael Clifton, Director of Public Affairs for the Kitchener, Ontario stake. He is a lawyer by day, but he is also involved with the KW Council of Churches, a multi-faith organization. He is also the founder of Strummerfest. Discover with me what makes Michael Clifton an interesting Canadian Mormon. Today, I'm very, very pleased to have a very special guest, Michael Clifton. Welcome, Michael. How are you today?
Good. Thank you, Sam.
That's good. Thanks for coming to be with us on the podcast. You're a very interesting guy. You cover a lot of ground. You have a lot of interests, and you do a lot of things. And I wanted to talk to you and share you with the rest of us Canadian Mormons.
All right.
Some of the things that you're working on right now, your present calling, which is what's the exact title of your calling?
The Director of Public Affairs for the Kitchener, Ontario stake.
Okay. And
also a High Counselor. And by the time you broadcast this, I'll have another calling.
Oh, really? Okay. So we can't say right now, though.
No.
You are very heavily involved with the community as well. You have an interest in putting on these concerts for worthy causes, and we're going to talk a little bit about that later on. You sit on the steering committee of Interfaith Grand River and the KW Council of Churches. Now, that's nothing to do with your church calling? That's just a community thing?
It happened by virtue of the church calling. As the Director of Public Affairs, I tried to get us involved with the World Religions Conference that the Ahmadiyya Muslims put on. Which occurred, but they asked that we look at getting involved with some of the interfaith groups. So I reached out to Interfaith Grand River, sat around the table with them for a year or so, and then eventually was asked if I would be interested in being on the steering committee. And as a result of that, I've been asked to be involved. Now, my understanding is I'm on the steering committee of the KW Council of Churches, but I have to be honest, they don't meet often enough for me to know for sure whether I was invited to assist or be a member of.
Okay.
I think I wrote there that I was, and that's I've put that on my signature line before, and they haven't objected to it, so I presume it's correct, but they don't meet very often. So
Okay.
Sounds good.
So to start us off, can you tell us a little bit about your upbringing, and if you had if faith was a big part of your upbringing, if the church played a big role or not?
No, the church played no role.
Okay.
Since I wasn't born in the church. My parents' background is, my mother, I suppose, was a Wesleyan Methodist by heritage, but really at the time that she and my dad were married or when they were dating, there was a greater interest in the spiritualist movement in England. Mm-hmm. I know they attended meetings of a fellow who was labeled the Happy Medium.
The Happy Medium.
The Happy Medium. They were good friends with a fellow who spoke with spirits. So that was part of their life. So I guess I have a kind of a cultish background. But my dad is more of an avowed agnostic, probably the most devoted agnostic you'll ever meet.
This is all along, or is this sort of he's finally come to this later on, or?
No, I think all along. He would dabble in religious discussion for the sake of argument more than anything. Mm-hmm. He's very he's got a strong conviction that we can't really know anything. So he has a strong suspicion for anyone who claims to have knowledge or a strong testimony, which makes for interesting discussions when we get together.
Sure. But
there was always a Christian base, of course. It's British background, so Christianity was part of the religious culture.
And the spiritualist movement was that a Christian base?
It was more of
thing?
a Christian spiritualism, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It was more in my teenage years that I started to look into other things, Buddhism and reincarnation and various things.
Just on your own? Just
more or less, a little bit. My mother was doing the same kind of things, but at different stages of life, so with different intent and interest.
Okay.
The Bible was always a key part of our lives. Christ was always a key part of our lives. It's the celebration of Christmas was never really about Christmas trees and gifts, although those were all fun things, and my family loves fun things. But my sister and I would go out and sing Christmas carols in the community to raise money for the local hospital, and we'd sing Happy Birthday to Jesus and that sort of thing.
Okay. Nice.
And I'm told that at a very young age I knew all the Bible stories very well. That my mother loves to talk about a time when we were going to the Thousand Islands, and I guess I got lost on the boat, or she couldn't find me on the boat. And when she did find me, I was sitting with a bunch of old ladies telling them stories from the New Testament.
Oh, wow.
So that for me was always important. And
so was this, you had attended a church?
We didn't as a family. I was christened Anglican when I was about 2 years old. I think that attending church for my parents was difficult because my father would be argumentative. Mm-hmm. And so that made the experience not as great for my mother. And in fact, I'm told that sometime when I was very young, they had seen the missionaries. Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons that didn't go further was because it was likely to be argumentative. But around grade 4, I guess, whatever age that is, 8, 9, 10, I'm not sure.
It's 9, I think.
Okay.
I think that's.
I'll trust you on that.
Yeah.
You have younger kids than I do. And I can't remember how it came about, but I ended up attending Parkway Bible Church in Toronto, which is near Ellesmere and Victoria Park, just on my own. I would get up early on a Sunday morning, get on the school bus, I guess the Sunday school bus, and go off to the church. And my mother never attended. It was just. Was
this maybe
just
a friend that had invited you, and
I don't remember knowing anybody else there. The person I liked best was the minister who was overseeing the Sunday school program. In fact, he went on to volunteer at Martyr's Shrine in Huronia, or wherever that is, St. Marie among the Hurons. I'm not sure if he ended up going into the Catholic priesthood. Last time I remember seeing him, he had a cassock on. So I don't know if he was playing a role there or had actually gone into the priesthood. Cassocks would normally be Orthodox.
Wait, this is your Anglican?
No, Parkway Bible Church was a sort of non-denominational gospel church.
Oh, okay.
So he could have become anything, right?
Okay.
as many of us do.
Yeah.
So I attended that. Of course, we moved a fair bit when I was young. Eventually, I ended up joining the United Church when I was about 15. My mother and I did attend together for a while, mm-hmm. and there was a lovely minister, James MacDonald, at Don Mills United Church on Pape. I believe it was on Pape mm-hmm. Avenue. And he used to visit us, and we'd sit and talk philosophy. He wasn't overtly religious in a sort of proselyting kind of sense. We'd talk about things that were of interest, and he tried to help us grow spiritually. And in fact, the day he confirmed me, I guess, a member of the United Church, I was about 15 at this point, that was the first time I'd actually heard him ask the question, do you believe in Jesus Christ? And do you accept him as your Savior? Which I said I did without really understanding what that meant. Much like the time the person in the parking lot at Thorncliffe Park Mall asked me to accept Jesus as my Savior when I was about 16, and I said, sure, whatever. But I didn't really understand. I had at that point looked at, I'd done the Silva Mind Control Meditation course and begun to read books on Buddhism and Hinduism and various things, and was very attracted to the Eastern religions, and very much becoming not attracted to organized religion. So it was a feat to end up joining the church.
So when they asked you the question, do you believe in Jesus Christ as your Savior? Do you accept him as your Savior? And when you answer yes, was it sort of like, yeah, of course, everybody who goes to church believes that, or
more
was
or less, yeah. I can't say that at that time in my life I had any real understanding of what the atonement was, or why we needed to be saved, or what he did, other than knowing the story of what he did. Mm-hmm. I don't think I'd ever taken time to deeply consider what it meant that he died for our sins. Mm-hmm. That really came to me later in life, and primarily through the Book of Mormon. When I was about 17, we were watching Mr. Kruger's Christmas on TV, mm-hmm. and the advertisement came on afterwards.
Jimmy Stewart, right?
Yeah, it was a beautiful show, and of course we love Jimmy Stewart. He's sort of a family favorite. Yeah. and an advertisement came on associated with it, inviting you to call in to get a free Tabernacle choir record, and of course they ask if you'd like to speak with the missionaries, to which I responded, well, we've talked to everyone else, why not? And of course we hadn't quite, but it felt like that. So they came, and I studied with the missionaries for about 1.25 years. My mother took the lessons with me from time to time, and I remember one evening we were just sitting in the living room, and I can't remember which of us initiated it, whether it was my mom or me, but one of us said to the other, I hope you're okay with this, but I think I'd like to get baptized, to which the other responded, me too, I'm so glad you said that. So we came to it very individually, although together, at the same time. It took a while, and in fact, during that time, the missionaries had done the classic, set a date to decide on being baptized, or they were actually telling me to set a date to be baptized. In my mind, I was setting that date to decide whether to get baptized.
Oh.
And then promptly forgot all about that. And then, as it turned out, on that date, I was reading Crime and Punishment, and whatever I was reading in that book made me think, oh, you should never join any organized religion. So ironically, on the very date I was to decide whether to join the church, I decided I would join no church. And then later came to the decision to join on the basis that I wouldn't know if it was true without trying. And I guess that sounds a little flimsy to some people, but I had to that point never met anybody in any religious group that had the same sense of conviction and dedication that I saw in the missionaries. And it was there, and they didn't have any aura of blind faith about them. They just very firmly believed what they believed, and they were honest about it. And if they were uncertain of something, they were uncertain of it. It was just a very honest faith, and yet a very strong faith. And not having seen that before, I thought, well, if anyone's got the truth, it might be these guys. But I'm not going to find out by sitting on the outside intellectualizing about it. I need to get in and experience it for
that was your
myself.
leap of faith.
Basically.
That's a pretty big leap.
It was a leap, and I've honestly,
especially for deciding not to join any organized religion.
As someone recently told me, I'm full of contradictions.
Now, this is pretty interesting. You growing up, you were exposed to so many different ways of thinking. Really, a multi-faith upbringing, really, between your parents and then your own investigation of.
And growing up in Toronto, of course. I mean, it's. I find it funny out here in Kitchener. People talk about diversity when you have a room full of people where 80% of them are white and 20% are of some other color or background. White, Anglo, or German being the dominant group, and they think that's diverse. I think, wow, I've never seen anywhere so white in my life.
It's pretty inverse to that.
That's
in
right.
Toronto.
That's right. The diversity there. Even back in the 70s, when growing up there, my best friend living next door to us was Japanese, and then there was the Indian girl, and then we were all mixed, and there was no really much thought about it. We just knew we all had different cultures. It didn't really mean anything to us. So.
Take us next to what happened, I guess, after you were baptized. You were, what, 17?
Just before my 18th birthday. The April before my 18th birthday, I joined the church.
All right.
So I guess I was 16 when I started investigating. I know I gave up the United Church to play Dungeons and Dragons. And somewhere in that time period, that was where I met the missionaries. That was a silly, youthful choice. It's because our group played on Sundays. So
is it?
With church. Anyway, I joined the church, and again, not having joined because of a strong spiritual conviction, I didn't stay active immediately. Although I didn't lose that sense of connection with the church, but I did. My attendance was spotty, and I remember it was our young men's leader and priest quorum advisors. Anyway, they came to visit me and invited me to come back out, and that was no big issue. I didn't actually realize that I was inactive at the time, or less active. And so I started attending more often. And the group of friends that I had around me were mostly people who took the gospel seriously and were thinkers. I mean, it's amongst that group from the the church now include people who've gone on to teach philosophy and write poetry and get their PhDs in English literature. And so they were a thoughtful group of kids, and that appealed to me because I was very academic and literary and artistically focused.
Now, at the age that you were when you joined the church, and these other guys in the church, were they like lifelong members?
For the most part, yeah.
Was there any kind of culture shock on your part or theirs? Like when you...
Not really, and I don't know whether that's just me being a little blasé or naive as I went into it. I mean, it took me a week after being baptized to give up tea, coffee, alcohol, and everything else. That was just what I did, and it didn't make any difference. Behavior-wise, they were all normal people. So they're just normal people who attend church and read the scriptures and pray, and that was great.
Well, now I don't know. Maybe the group of guys that you had, it sounds pretty nice to have a bunch of thinkers. Maybe they were fine, but I'm just thinking of the normal, typical group of boys at that age in the church. Probably haven't thought much about Buddhism and Eastern religions and spiritualism. They probably not even aware of all the different denominations and what they believe at that age.
Yeah, I don't really think that was the case amongst them. And interestingly, I had a group of friends that were similar to that at school. So on all sides, I had thoughtful, interesting, intellectual friends. My mother had much more culture shock coming into the church, where she'd been a typical woman of the 70s and wore pants everywhere, and was a working woman, and so coming into a group of women who wear dresses everywhere and care more about how to make potato salad than how to earn money for their home. That's caricature, of course, but she experienced more of a culture shock. I didn't, and in fact at that time I was getting into punk rock more. I was a heavy Clash fan, and as it turned out, so were these group of guys. And in fact,
really?
I went out to see the Susie and the Banshees concert with a bunch of Mormons. So.
Was that hard on your mother?
Yeah.
Adopting this new way of life, this new lifestyle, was that something that she eventually, I guess, molded into more, or was it something that was always...
I think she's much more comfortable now at church than she was back then, and I can't say, I can't pretend to completely understand what her experience was. She was a woman in her 40s who'd been a single mom, heavy smoker, heavy coffee drinker, not a partier as such, but she'd been a regular woman outside of the church with various relationships and situations that a lot of the women in the church had never had or experienced. It probably wasn't completely fair to presume that the women of the church couldn't understand her, but that was her perception and feeling. She felt somewhat on the outside and felt that they didn't understand and were judgmental. I don't know that was entirely true. I know a lot of those women, and I don't think there was a judgmental bone in their bodies, but they might have been speaking different languages, not able to really communicate across that divide of experience. So yeah, it's been on and off difficult for her, and even now she has frustrations sometimes dealing with some people in the church.
After you join the church, you're almost at missionary age.
Yes,
and it says here you did serve a mission. And can you remind us again, where did you serve?
I served in Japan, northern Japan, and I left just before my 21st birthday.
What made you decide to go?
Well, something we haven't mentioned that underlying all this, I always had a desire to go into the ministry. Not the ministry of a particular church, but the idea of being a minister was of great interest to me. And before joining the church, when some kids are designing the engineering things or the spaceships they're going to build, I was imagining what sort of church I would create. Okay. So actually, when we were studying the church, one of the attractions was the opportunity to go on a mission, to actually be able to go out and serve in the ministry. I didn't really understand at that point that the church was completely a lay ministry from front to back. But that's been one of the great joys for me. I don't think I would find as much satisfaction in life if I didn't have that opportunity to serve in the church in more meaningful ways than just, bringing cupcakes to the bake sale kind of thing. Not that isn't meaningful. So I always had a focus on a mission. When I when I began to prepare for it was when my bishop at the time challenged me to read the Book of Mormon for real, not just to study it on Sundays with people. And
not just to check it off the list.
That's right.
Was there seminary in those days?
Not that I was able to attend.
Okay.
There was seminary. I was given some of the books, but I don't think it was a well-structured system then, or I just missed the classes. I don't know. Maybe the timing wasn't right. But that challenge was sort of the beginning for me. Again, you can never get a full picture of life from sound bites, but there was always a spiritual stream in there, and never a sense of distance from God through any of this, but never a sense of a deep connection. And then reading the Book of Mormon that first time from front to back without pause or any other contemplation, I came out with a very strong conviction about its message of repentance in particular. That it was really a call to us to change our lives, to be true Christians. I don't think I would have phrased it that way back then, but that started something moving inside my head, and then I had another experience around that time where I was reading in Alma, I believe it was in Alma, about the atonement and why it was needed, and realized that I didn't really understand it. I didn't know why it was needed. It seemed, again, coming out of that sort of the reincarnationist point of view, you see eternity as this constant, ongoing opportunity to get better. And so why would you need someone to atone for you? You'll just make up your karma in the next life, or that sort of thing. That's simplification. But anyway, so I called a member of the church, an older member that I was friends with, and asked him to explain the passages to me and explain to me what it meant. And to this day, I don't remember the exact passage and I don't remember exactly what he said, but whatever he said clicked. It's like the pieces came together and I finally understood what the atonement meant, why we needed to rely on Christ, and had then the most significant spiritual experience I'd had to that time, and one of the most significant that I've had in my life. And acquired at that moment the real conviction that Jesus is the Christ, and understanding what that means in a way that would change who I would be, as opposed to just intellectually being accepted.
Would you say that was your conversion?
That was the conversion moment. And so, again, I was on sort of naively on the right path anyway, in terms of seeking the ministry and seeking to serve on a mission and seeking to be committed to God in some way. But that's the moment that gave it all meaning and substance. And had I not had a moment like that prior to the mission, I think the mission could have undone me. You meet enough challenge. And interestingly for me, the challenge in the mission was both personal and social. And I was in Japan. Most people are not Christians. A lot of people take religion somewhat superficially. It's no big surprise in the world these days. But in Japan, they say, how do they put it? You're born Shinto, you marry Christian, you die Buddhist, just because those religions provide the appropriate rituals for the appropriate kinds of stages in life. So it's not, some people would say that's deep, but really there wasn't a profound commitment to spirituality in Japanese culture generally. So that, having to try and get across that barrier, and of course on every mission I think you deal with those anti-Mormon elements, the minister who wants to sit you down and set you straight, and had I not by then acquired some sense of spirituality, that could have been very difficult. Whereas I remember that one experience, it was testimony building in an odd way, as this minister, he was a very nice man, but he was talking to us about Jesus Christ. Everything he said we agreed with, and the Spirit was very strong. The Spirit was there saying, yep, what he's saying is right, that's a wonderful testimony. And then he would talk about Joseph Smith, and the Spirit would vanish. And I told him, I said, whenever you talk about Joseph Smith and the Mormon Church, the Spirit's not there testifying that what you're saying is right. He wasn't happy with that. But it was a clear conviction to me that, even a lot of good Christians can be very mistaken on key things.
Was it mostly Christian, or is it like a real good mix in Japan? Like there's just...
Oh, it's mostly Buddhist.
Mostly Buddhist.
Oh, yes.
Okay,
yeah.
so it's kind of Christians in Japan, it's sort of like Buddhists here, like in terms of
Yeah, very much
market
a minority.
share, for
Yes,
lack of a better
the
word.
market share is very small, but they're not disrespected. So in that sense, very like Buddhists here, who are considered a respectable group of people.
Did you find that your background in your familiarity with Buddhism, because you had already investigated that, did that help you in?
It did in some ways. I mean, when we're teenagers and we study things, we tend to think we know them better than we possibly can. So I understood certain elements, and I knew ways of discussing, or when they would express a concept to me, it wasn't foreign to me at first glance. So that helped. And in fact, there was one woman we were teaching, and as we were teaching her, I don't know whether it was the way I was able to phrase things or not, but she was able to identify the similarities between Buddhist thought and the restored gospel.
Oh, okay.
So it was interesting for her. Yeah.
Did you learn much? What I mean by that is, if we enter into a conversation about religion or about anything, and we're only of the mindset that I'm going to teach you something, you don't really have anything that you could teach me. That's what I mean by that. Were you able to learn from these people on your mission? From them?
Always, yeah. It's when you're on a mission, you are out to teach. So I didn't go out seeking to learn from others, but it's impossible to be an effective missionary, or really an effective anything, if your heart isn't open to other people, who they are, what they believe, what they feel.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there was continual learning, but of course, it's not, for that 2 years you're dedicated to the teaching, so I wasn't spending time studying Buddhism. But
right.
Certainly, I mean,
but not in a formal way. But
no, not in a formal way. But we attended. We would go to the Buddhist temples. We would go to the Shinto temples, learn about the New Year's traditions and the Obon festival, and listen to people tell their stories. And of interest to me more was culturally and historically learning about Japan and its people. Again, I wasn't so much seeking for religious insight at that point, but you certainly do. And again, maybe it's my background. I simply take it for granted that there's a spiritual component to everyone's life and something to be shared there.
Yeah. Was it a good mission?
Yes.
Did you find it a good experience overall?
Yeah. The only negative to the mission was having to deal with my own faults and weaknesses, which, for some reason, God uses a mission to do that to us.
Yeah. Were your parents, your father was, he never was baptized, is that right?
No, and actually my parents were divorced when I was 3, so...
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
So he never had to live in a Mormon home in that.
Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah.
Did you stay in contact with him?
Yeah, we still have a good relationship.
Was he supportive of you doing what, following your own faith journey?
In principle, yeah. It's kind of like when my dad's second wife passed away, I asked if we would be able to do her work in the temple. And my father's question back was, does it come out of love? That was all he cared about. Didn't matter whether he believed or what I believed about it. If it was intended out of love, then it was acceptable to him. So likewise with the missionary work. If he believed I was going out to try and browbeat other people to join a religion against their will, he would have been very angry at it.
Interesting.
But understanding that we were going out to share what we believed was best for the best of others, then he was fully supportive of that.
I wonder if some or most agnostics are agnostic because they understand these principles of love and charity and serving others, but they see the hypocrisy where
I think that's true for many.
Those who you confess Jesus' name and you treat others like that, like that kind of.
Yeah.
You just can't get the head around.
We are very often our own worst advertisement.
Yeah. All right. So when you come home from your mission, what do you do?
Well, I discovered that my mother had moved to a 1-bedroom apartment. So I had to learn to be independent.
You got the hint.
I got the hint. What did I do? I had the misfortune of being pretty clueless on some very practical things. So it took me a while to even figure out that there was assistance for students to go to school. I just presumed I couldn't afford it, so I looked for work. Did I work at 7-Eleven then? I think that was after my mission.
So you worked your way into through school, or
more or less. I mean, I did get
Oh,
student
man.
loans by the time we got there, but that was really because I got married before I ended up in school. I
oh
had
man,
done
I wish I didn't know that you could get loans. Then I would have worked and I wouldn't have been in debt for years and years.
Well, I eventually did learn, and that was what happened. The debt was massive. But no, so I did a couple of night courses at York. I did a history level 300 course, my first university course in Chinese, Japanese, and Korean history. Because having been in Japan, of course, it was interest then to learn more about the Far East.
Fascinating. And what school is this?
At York.
York, okay.
And I did another course in administrative studies because I knew I was impractical and thought I needed to learn about how to run a business. I didn't do as well in that course as I did in the history course. And during that time, then eventually I met my wife. In fact, I think we met a year after my mission. We were married a year later. So just before I turned 25. Actually, just after I turned 25.
How did you meet?
Same week. We met in the parking lot of the Bayview Chapel in Toronto while it was under construction. I had been with my friend Alessandro. We were out wandering around the Don Valley, the woods and the river portion, not the highway, contemplating writing a play about the life of Joseph Smith, and actually thinking of sort of following the format of the Passion plays and just writing about the last few weeks of his life. But we were both the perfect procrastinators. So we would sit and chat about things and not actually get anything written. And so we decided to go up and take a look at the chapel while it was being built. And as we drove up, I saw these two women standing in front of the skeleton of the church as well. And immediately my heart leapt out. And I said to Alessandra, I said, that's the girl I'm going to marry. It was very much love at first sight across the parking lot before we'd even said our first hello.
Very prophetic statement there.
Yeah, well, and I guess I forced her into it after that. Poor kid. We met. Turned out she was actually the ex-girlfriend of an old friend of mine. And apparently we'd almost met once before my mission. But we never actually met, which is kind of odd.
Now your wife is a famously talented opera singer. Was she a opera singer back then too, or was
an opera singer is probably a title she would eschew.
She sings opera.
She is a classically trained singer. Yeah, at that time, she was an accomplished singer and conductor for her age and circumstance. She was self-taught on piano. She had won a conducting competition in Korea. She's beautiful natural voice and had done some training with Lois MacDonald in Toronto, who was an opera singer, but she had not yet then had her formal training that she's had since. So the years of singing in choirs and recitals and things has all followed from there.
Wow.
But no, her beautiful voice was one of the attractions. Once I got to know her.
So at this point you're married and you're in school for history.
No, actually philosophy.
Philosophy.
The first year, I have to admit, I didn't know what I was doing. I took philosophy, I took history, I took a couple other courses, I can't remember. I studied Latin. I really didn't know what I wanted to do. Philosophy ended up being my decision because I wanted to be a writer. And you'd think English would be where you'd want to go if you want to be a writer, and that had been my first plan coming out of high school. But I realized that philosophy teaches you how to think about everything, where any other subject teaches you how to think about that subject and only that subject. So I thought if I wanted to be a good thinker, I needed to study philosophy. And it turned out that was true. Not that I'm great at it, but I'm much better than I would have been.
Does that shape every thought that you have today? Like, is that...
It certainly affects things. Yeah. It's been so long now, I'm not as academically philosophical as I used to be. But it certainly does train you to ask questions, to make no assumptions, and to recognize that there are multiple ways of seeing the world, and all of them can appear very valid all at the same time. After
having this philosophical training, did you view your worldview differently? Did you view your faith differently, and the faith of others?
No, I don't think it changed. It amplified things for me rather than changing things. And a lot of people go through that. They study philosophy. It changes everything for them. Mm-hmm. For me, it just deepened convictions and ideas and understanding. I suppose it did give me the capacity to be more tolerant. Not that I was ever really intolerant, or at least not consciously or deliberately intolerant of other people's views. But again, the fact that In one course of philosophy, you'll study half a dozen different worldviews, and you have to give them all equal respect and recognize the strength of reasoning, intellect, and experience that's behind them. It's hard then to be intolerant of people with different points of view. They usually come from a fair place.
Are you a black and white thinker, or are you very gray?
No, I'm not sure I'm even gray. There's muddles of purple and yellow and orange. When purple and yellow combine, that makes gray.
Because that's just who you are, or is this philosophy helping to
philosophy
shape,
again
to shape your the way you think?
Yeah, I think philosophy amplified that again. The philosopher I ended up most attracted to after Aristotle. I loved studying Aristotle, and for that reason was very attracted to Thomas Aquinas. But then the next philosopher that really moved me was William James, the founder of pragmatism, and very much an open mind to every idea. One of my favorite quotes about him is that he loved thickness in his philosophy. So it was hard to pin him down to a particular school of thought. And I don't know if that's just an excuse for being sloppy and non-committal, or it's just the fact that life is very diverse. And maybe this is the influence of my father's agnosticism. We really don't know, right? I believe with every conviction of my heart that God lives, that there is objective truth. I'd say that I know that as much as I believe anything can be known in this life. But am I able to judge anyone else's decisions? Do I know if what they're doing is right or wrong? At times, yes. I shouldn't say it quite that. There is an aspect of black and white in certain things. Mm-hmm. I know that murder is bad. But in terms of general everyday living and thinking, most people's thoughts and feelings come from some justified or justifiable place. And if they are in error, if the way they're living their lives hurts themselves, then you can work back with them through those ideas and experiences to find where the mistake happened, where they ended up on a route. One of the things that I dislike most about the way most people think is that people are under the illusion that logic helps identify truth, and it doesn't. Logic is a tool for getting from point A to point B through a thought process that makes sense. But if point A is wrong, point B will still be wrong, even though you get there logically. Okay. So a lot of people can, with firm conviction and a sense that what they're doing is right, end up in the completely wrong place, a place that's harmful to them or to others. That would actually be perhaps the thing that philosophy gave me the most, was the ability not to be overly influenced by what sounds intellectually right.